Billionaire CEO shouted, "Get out, poor man!" Humiliated the single father in front of everyone. Before the story begins, let's make this personal. What brought you here today? A recommendation, curiosity, or maybe just the universe guiding you? The crystal chandeliers of Chateau Bleu cast dancing shadows across the white marble floors as Harper Wellington stepped through the entrance, her Louboutin heels clicking with practiced authority. At 27, she commanded attention wherever she went, not just because of her striking features or the custom Valentino dress that hugged her frame, but because of the invisible crown of power she wore. Wellington Enterprises had made her a billionaire before 30, and she never let anyone forget it. "Ms. Wellington, your usual table is ready." The maitre d' practically bowed as she passed. Harper barely acknowledged him with a nod. Her mind was elsewhere, on the quarterly reports, on the board meeting tomorrow, on the acquisition that would cement her status as the youngest self-made billionaire in tech. The restaurant was her domain, one of 12 establishments she owned across Manhattan. Tonight was supposed to be a quick dinner before reviewing contracts at her penthouse. That's when she saw them. A man in his mid-30s sat at a corner table, his shirt clean but clearly off-rack from a discount store. His broad shoulders seemed uncomfortable in the formal setting, and his weathered hands suggested manual labor. But it was the little girl across from him that made Harper pause. A child of maybe 6 years old with golden curls and the biggest brown eyes Harper had ever seen. The girl wore a simple yellow dress with a small stain near the collar, and she clutched a piece of fried chicken in her small hands, staring at it with wonder as if it were treasure. Something about the scene grated against Harper's carefully curated world. This was Chateau Bleu, where entrees started at $200, where Manhattan's elite came to see and be seen, not a place for discount store shirts and fried chicken. Grayson Carter felt his daughter's hand squeeze his under the table, and he squeezed back reassuringly. 6 months. It had been 6 months since Sarah's death. 6 months of Emma barely speaking, 6 months of working 3 jobs to keep their tiny apartment and put food on the table. Tonight was special. Emma's therapist said she'd finally started making progress, and Grayson had saved for 3 months to bring her here, to the restaurant her mother had always dreamed of visiting. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered to Emma. "We belong here just as much as anyone else." Emma's eyes remained fixed on her chicken tender, the only item on the children's menu under $20, but Grayson saw the tiny smile tugging at her lips. She'd smiled. After 6 months of silence and tears, his little girl had smiled at something as simple as a piece of chicken in a fancy restaurant. The moment shattered when shadow fell across their table. "Excuse me." The voice was cold, cutting through the ambient music and quiet conversations like ice. "I need to speak with you. Now." Grayson looked up to find a striking woman looming over their table, her expression one of barely contained disgust. He recognized her instantly. Her face was on billboards across the city. Harper Wellington, the tech mogul, the restaurant owner. His heart sank. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" Grayson kept his voice steady, aware of Emma's grip tightening on his hand. Harper's eyes flicked to Emma, then back to Grayson, and something harsh settled in her features. "Yes, there's a problem. This is a 5-star establishment, not a diner. I don't know how you got past the host, but we have a reservation," Grayson interrupted quietly, pulling out his phone to show the confirmation. "We're paying customers just like everyone else." The nearby tables had gone quiet. Grayson felt the weight of dozens of eyes turning toward them, and he saw Emma shrinking into her chair, that fragile smile vanishing like morning dew. Harper glanced at the phone, but her expression didn't soften. If anything, she seemed more irritated. "I don't care about your reservation. Look around you. Look at what you're wearing, what your daughter is eating. This isn't your world. You're making my other guests uncomfortable." "We're not doing anything wrong," Grayson said, fighting to keep his voice level. "My daughter wanted to come here. Her mother—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. How could he explain to this cold woman about Sarah's dream, about Emma's silence, about how this simple meal meant everything? I don't need your life story, Harper snapped, her voice rising just enough that more heads turned. I need you to leave, immediately. Emma's chair scraped against the floor. Grayson looked down to see his daughter's face crumpling, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clutched that piece of chicken like it was the last solid thing in a collapsing world. She wasn't making a sound. She never did anymore, but her small body shook with silent sobs. Please, Grayson said, and he hated the desperate note in his voice. We'll finish quickly and go. Just let us get out. Harper's voice cracked like a whip through the restaurant, shocking in its venom. Get out of here. You don't belong in this place, poor man. Take your charity case, daughter, and leave before I call security. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen noises seemed to have stopped. Grayson felt the blood drain from his face, felt every eye in the room boring into him, felt the weight of humiliation crushing down on his shoulders. But worse, so much worse, was looking down at Emma. His daughter sat frozen, tears streaming down her face, that piece of chicken still clutched in her trembling hand. Her eyes, those big brown eyes that looked so much like Sarah's, were fixed on Harper with an intensity that made Grayson's breath catch. Emma wasn't just crying, she was memorizing. Every detail of Harper's face, her stance, her dress, the cruel twist of her mouth. Emma's mind was recording this moment with the photographic precision that her therapist had mentioned, but that Grayson had never fully understood. Come on, sweetheart, Grayson said softly, standing and dropping $200 bills on the table, more than twice what they'd ordered, money he'd need for next week's groceries. Let's go home. Emma stood mechanically, still holding that chicken, her eyes never leaving Harper's face. As Grayson took her hand and led her toward the exit, he heard the whispers starting, saw phones being raised to record their shame. Tomorrow, this would probably be all over social media, the poor father and his silent daughter, thrown out of a fancy restaurant. But as they reached the door, Emma did something unexpected. She stopped, turned back to face Harper across the crowded room, and spoke for the first time in 6 months. My mommy said you were bad. The words were barely above a whisper, but in the shocked silence of the restaurant, they carried like a bell. Grayson froze. Harper's face went pale. And Emma, still clutching that piece of chicken, turned and walked out into the Manhattan night, leaving behind a room full of questions and one woman whose carefully constructed world had just developed its first crack. Outside, Grayson knelt beside his daughter on the sidewalk, oblivious to his expensive slacks pressing into the dirty concrete. Emma, baby, you spoke. What did you mean, sweetheart? How did Mommy know that woman? But Emma had retreated back into silence, her eyes distant and unfocused, that piece of chicken still gripped in her small fist like evidence of a crime yet to be proven. Inside Chateau Bleu, Harper Wellington stood motionless, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with anger. That child's voice, those words. A memory stirred in the back of her mind. A woman's face, 3 years ago, before the final hostile takeover that had made Harper's fortune. A woman who had tried to warn her, who had known too much, who had disappeared before she could become a problem. A woman named Sarah Carter. Harper's hand trembled as she reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over a number she hadn't called in years, the private investigator who handled her sensitive business matters. She needed to know who that man was, who that child was, and most importantly, what that dead woman might have told her daughter before she'd stopped being a problem. But as Harper looked around her pristine restaurant, at the carefully curated wealth and privilege, she felt the first cold finger of fear trace down her spine. Because that little girl's eyes had been too knowing, too focused, too aware, and those 4 simple words, "My mommy said you were bad," had been spoken with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what they meant. The question was, what else did Emma Carter know? And how much had her mother told her before she died? The fluorescent lights of Grayson's apartment buzzed overhead as he watched Emma arrange crayons on the kitchen table at 2 in the morning. She hadn't slept, hadn't spoken again since those 4 words outside the restaurant. but her small hands moved with purpose, selecting colors with deliberate precision. Blacks, grays, silver, red. "Baby, you should be sleeping," Grayson said gently, pulling his jacket tighter. The heating had been cut off again. He'd have to visit the landlord tomorrow with what little remained of his paycheck. Emma ignored him, pressing a black crayon to the paper with focused intensity. Grayson moved closer, and what he saw made his breath catch. It wasn't a child's drawing. It was a portrait, photorealistic in its detail despite being rendered in waxy crayon. Harper Wellington stared back at him from the page, every feature captured with impossible accuracy. The cruel twist of her mouth, the cold calculation in her eyes, even the specific pattern of her Valentino dress. "Emma, how—" Grayson stopped. Her therapist had mentioned something about eidetic memory, about Emma's unusual ability to recall details with perfect clarity. But seeing it manifested like this, seeing his 6-year-old daughter recreate a face with the skill of a trained artist, sent chills down his spine. Emma set down the black crayon and picked up red. She drew a line connecting Harper's portrait to another figure, a woman's face that Grayson recognized with painful clarity. Sarah, his late wife, Emma's mother, rendered in the same photographic detail. Then Emma drew something else, a building, tall, glass, imposing. And inside the building, she drew what looked like a document with numbers on it. Her small hand trembled as she drew, and tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop. "What is this, sweetheart?" Grayson whispered, but he already knew Emma wouldn't answer. Instead, he pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the drawing, his hands shaking. Whatever Emma was trying to tell him, whatever Sarah had known 3 years ago, it was important enough that their daughter was trying to communicate it the only way she could. Across Manhattan, Harper Wellington stood in her penthouse office. The city lights spread below her like an empire of stars. The private investigator's report glowed on her laptop screen, and with each line she read, her carefully controlled composure cracked further. Subject: Grayson Michael Carter, age 34. Occupation: warehouse worker, primary, night custodian, secondary, weekend construction laborer, tertiary. Residence: apartment 4B, 1847 Morrison Street, Brooklyn. Marital status: widower. Dependents: Emma Rose Carter. Age 6. Harper's eyes skipped ahead to the section that made her pulse quicken. Deceased spouse: Sarah Catherine Carter, née Morrison. Date of death: April 15, 2022. Cause of death: single vehicle accident, Highway 87. Previous employment: senior data analyst, Wellington Enterprises, 2019-2022. The room seemed to tilt. Sarah Carter had worked for her. 3 years ago, during the Meridian Pharma acquisition, the hostile takeover that had catapulted Wellington Enterprises from successful to unstoppable. Harper's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up old employment records, security footage, email chains she'd thought were deleted. There, Sarah Morrison, the data analyst who'd sent that email 2 weeks before the acquisition closed. Harper had dismissed it at the time, had her assistant flag it as spam from a disgruntled employee. But now she opened it, reading words that should have stayed buried. Ms. Wellington, I know what you're planning with Meridian's clinical trial data. I have copies of the real numbers. The ones showing the heart medication causes more harm than good. The fabricated data you're using to boost stock prices before acquisition will kill people. I'm taking this to the FDA unless you stop the acquisition immediately. Sarah Morrison, Senior Data Analyst. Harper's hands were shaking now. She remembered what had happened next. A phone call to Marcus, her head of security, a conversation about handling problems efficiently, an assurance that the situation would resolve itself. 2 weeks later, Sarah Morrison had died in a tragic accident on an empty highway, her car veering off a bridge with no witnesses and no clear explanation. The acquisition had closed. Wellington Enterprises had absorbed Meridian Pharma. The medication had launched. Billions in profit had followed. And Harper had convinced herself that Sarah Morrison was just a paranoid analyst who'd met an unfortunate end. But now that analyst's daughter had spoken, And worse, far worse, Emma Carter had that same analytical brilliance reflected in eyes that saw too much, remembered too much, knew too much. Harper's phone buzzed. Marcus Fletcher, head of security. "We have a problem." His voice was tight. "Sarah Carter's old work computer was supposed to be wiped and destroyed 3 years ago. It wasn't. Someone in IT kept it in storage." "Where is it now?" Harper demanded. "Missing. Disappeared from secure storage sometime in the last month." Harper closed her eyes. Sarah had hidden something. Evidence, probably. Copies of those trial data files, proof of the fabrication, maybe even documentation of threats Harper's team had made. And if that little girl truly had her mother's photographic memory, if Sarah had shown Emma something before she died. "Find Grayson Carter," Harper said coldly. "Monitor his movements, his phone calls, everything." "And the girl?" Harper hesitated for just a moment, thinking of those big brown eyes that whispered accusation. Then her jaw set. She hadn't built an empire by being sentimental. "The girl is 6 years old. What can she possibly do?" The moment the words left her mouth, Harper's laptop pinged with a news alert. Her blood ran cold as she read the headline, "Anonymous tip leads FDA to investigate Wellington Meridian heart medication." The article was brief, but devastating. An unknown source had sent detailed documentation to the FDA showing discrepancies in clinical trial data for HeartGuard, the medication that had generated $3 billion in revenue over the past 3 years. The FDA was launching an immediate investigation. Harper's phone exploded with calls, board members, investors, lawyers. But she ignored them all, her mind racing. Who had sent that tip? Who had Sarah's computer? And how was it possible that mere hours after her confrontation with Grayson Carter, her entire company was suddenly under federal scrutiny? She pulled up security footage from Chateau Bleu, zooming in on the moment Emma had spoken. The little girl's eyes. So focused, so certain, and in her hand still clutching that piece of chicken. Harper's breath caught. She enhanced the image, zooming closer on Emma's other hand, the one that had been hidden under the table. The child was holding something, a small device, a voice recorder. Emma Carter hadn't just been crying in that restaurant. She'd been recording Harper's voice, her words, her public humiliation of a paying customer. But more than that, Harper replayed her own words and felt ice flood her veins. She'd said, "Charity case daughter," and "before I call security." Those weren't just cruel words, they were evidence of a pattern. A pattern that, combined with Sarah Carter's suspicious death, Grayson's poverty, despite his wife's senior position at Wellington Enterprises, and now an FDA investigation, painted a very different picture than Harper's carefully crafted public image. Someone was building a case, someone had planned this. And Harper had walked right into their trap, letting her arrogance blind her to the possibility that a 6-year-old child could be the most dangerous person in that restaurant. Back in Brooklyn, Grayson finally convinced Emma to sleep, though her small hand still clutched that drawing. As he covered her with a thin blanket, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Mr. Carter, my name is Detective Rachel Morrison. I'm with the NYPD Financial Crimes Unit. I need to speak with you about your late wife, Sarah Carter. It's urgent." Grayson's heart hammered. "What about Sarah?" "Mr. Carter, we have reason to believe your wife's death wasn't an accident. We've been investigating Wellington Enterprises for 3 years, and we need your help. But more importantly," the detective's voice dropped, urgent and serious, "we need to make sure you and Emma are safe. Harper Wellington is dangerous. And if she realizes what you know, what your daughter might know—" "No, we don't know anything," Grayson protested, but even as he said it, he looked at Emma's drawing lying on the table. The building, the documents, the connection his daughter had drawn between Sarah and Harper. "Mr. Carter, your daughter recorded Harper Wellington tonight. That recording is already making its way through social media, and it's damaging, very damaging. Wellington will retaliate. They always do." Grayson's hands went cold. "How do you know about the recording?" "Because 30 minutes ago, Someone anonymously sent it to every major news outlet in New York, along with documentation suggesting Harper Wellington was involved in your wife's death. Mr. Carter, someone is using you and your daughter to take down Wellington Enterprises, and I don't think you realize you're pawns in a very dangerous game." The line went dead. Grayson stood frozen in his tiny kitchen, looking at his sleeping daughter, at her drawings, at the pieces of a puzzle he didn't understand, but that was clearly designed to destroy Harper Wellington, using Emma as the weapon. But who had sent the recording? Who had Sarah's old computer? And most terrifying of all, who was willing to put a 6-year-old child in the crosshairs to bring down a billion-dollar empire? Emma stirred in her sleep, and Grayson saw her lips move, forming silent words. He leaned closer, and his blood turned to ice as he made out what she was saying in her dream. "Mommy said to wait until I was 6. Mommy said then I'd remember everything. Mommy said then it would be time." Sarah had planned this. Before she died, she'd prepared her daughter. But for what? And how deep did this conspiracy go? Outside their apartment, a black sedan pulled to the curb. Inside sat Marcus Fletcher, Harper Wellington's head of security, watching the lights in Grayson's apartment. His phone buzzed with orders from Harper. Observe, report, and if necessary, neutralize any threats to company interests. Marcus looked at the photo his team had provided, little Emma Carter with her golden curls and innocent face. He'd done a lot of questionable things for Harper Wellington over the years, a lot of things that kept him up at night. But killing a 6-year-old girl, that was a line even he wasn't sure he could cross. His phone buzzed again, more insistent this time. The morning sun barely penetrated the grimy windows of Grayson's apartment, but Emma was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with new drawings spread before her. Grayson, who dozed in a chair watching the door all night, startled at movement and immediately checked his daughter. She'd drawn more buildings, more faces. But this time there were dates written in a child's careful handwriting, numbers that meant nothing to Grayson but were arranged with mathematical precision around a central figure, a woman who looked like Sarah, but older, with different hair. Grayson squinted. No, it was Sarah, but from before he'd known her. From another life. "Emma, where did you see Mommy like this?" Grayson asked, knowing he wouldn't get an answer but unable to stop himself. Emma's crayon continued moving. She drew another face, a man with sharp features and cold eyes. Grayson's phone buzzed before he could study it closer. Detective Morrison's voice was urgent. "Mr. Carter, don't go to work today. Stay inside. Lock your doors. Harper Wellington just held an emergency press conference, and she's painting you as an extortionist. She's claiming you staged last night's incident to blackmail her." "What? That's insane!" "There's more. She's filed for a restraining order against you and Emma, claiming you've been stalking her, making threats. Her legal team is already spinning this as a setup. By noon, you'll be the villain in every news outlet." Grayson felt the room spin. "But the recording proves nothing, except that she asked you to leave her restaurant. Her lawyers are arguing she had every right to refuse service, that you were trespassing when you refused. They're destroying you in the court of public opinion, Mr. Carter. And worse, Child Protective Services is being pressured to investigate your fitness as a parent." The phone slipped from Grayson's hand. CPS. They could take Emma. He looked at his daughter, still drawing with focused intensity, oblivious to the war being waged around her. "What do I do?" Grayson whispered. "You need a lawyer, a good one. I'm sending you contact information for someone who can help, someone who knows how Wellington operates. Her name is Patricia Chen. She's expensive, but I can't afford expensive. I can barely afford rent." There was a long pause. "Mr. Carter, Patricia Chen doesn't need your money. She needs your story. She's been trying to bring down Wellington Enterprises for 5 years, ever since Harper's company destroyed her brother's pharmaceutical startup. She'll represent you pro bono if you'll help her build a case." A knock on the door made Grayson jump. "Detective, someone's here." "Don't answer it. Look through the peephole first." Grayson crept to the door, his heart pounding. Through the fisheye lens, he saw an elegant Asian woman in her 40s, carrying a leather briefcase and looking entirely too polished for his rundown building. "Mr. Carter?" she called through the door. "My name is Patricia Chen. Detective Morrison sent me. I'm here to help." 40 minutes later, Patricia Chen sat at Grayson's kitchen table, studying Emma's drawings with an intensity that made Grayson nervous. The lawyer had listened to his story without interruption, her expression growing harder with each detail. "Your daughter is remarkable," Patricia finally said, gesturing to the drawings. "Do you understand what she's documenting here? Pictures of Harper Wellington?" Grayson offered weakly. "No, Mr. Carter. She's documenting a timeline. Look, each drawing has dates. See these numbers? They correspond to stock transactions. These faces," she pointed to the sharp-featured man Emma had drawn. "That's Marcus Fletcher, Wellington's head of security. And this," she tapped a drawing of a building, "that's the FDA headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland. Your daughter is mapping out a conspiracy. She's 6 years old. How could she possibly? Because your wife taught her." Patricia pulled out her own laptop, opening files that made Grayson's head swim with data. "Sarah Carter wasn't just a senior data analyst, Mr. Carter. She was a forensic accountant with a photographic memory who specialized in uncovering corporate fraud. Before she worked for Wellington, she worked for the SEC. She was undercover." The room tilted. "What? Your wife was investigating Wellington Enterprises from the inside. She found evidence of massive fraud, not just the Meridian Pharma data fabrication, but years of stock manipulation, insider trading, bribery of FDA officials. She was building a case that would have destroyed Harper Wellington and sent her to federal prison for decades. Then why didn't she? Because she died before she could deliver the evidence, or so everyone thought." Patricia's eyes gleamed. But Sarah Carter was brilliant. She knew she was in danger. So she did something unprecedented. She taught her daughter. She used Emma's eidetic memory as a backup drive for human brain. Every document Sarah reviewed, every face she saw, every transaction she uncovered, she showed it all to Emma, knowing that even if Sarah died, her daughter would remember. Grayson stared at Emma, who continued drawing, unaware she was the subject of discussion. "You're saying my wife turned our daughter into a living witness?" "I'm saying your wife saved the most important evidence in the safest place she could find, in Emma's mind, a place no one could search, no one could hack, no one could destroy." Patricia leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, your daughter doesn't just remember what happened in that restaurant. She remembers everything Sarah showed her 3 years ago, every fraudulent document, every illegal transaction, every crime Harper Wellington committed. And now that Emma is 6, old enough to testify in court, old enough for her memories to be considered reliable, she's become the most dangerous weapon in this war. Emma can't testify. She barely speaks. She doesn't need to speak. She needs to draw." Patricia gestured to the papers covering the table. "These drawings are admissible evidence if properly documented and verified. Your daughter is giving us a roadmap to Wellington's empire. We just need to follow it." Grayson's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Just 2 words. "Get out." Then another text, this time with a photo attachment. Grayson opened it and felt his blood turn to ice. It was a picture of Emma's kindergarten, taken that morning. In the foreground stood Marcus Fletcher, Harper Wellington's head of security. Patricia saw his expression and grabbed the phone. Her face went pale. "We need to leave. Now. Emma doesn't have school today." "That's not the point. They're showing you they can reach her anywhere. They're escalating." Patricia was already gathering Emma's drawings, stuffing them carefully into her briefcase. "I have a safe house. We go there now, and we start building this case before Wellington's team decides that removing Emma is easier than fighting her in court." Emma finally looked up from her drawing, and Grayson saw something in his daughter's eyes he'd never seen before. Awareness, understanding, as if she'd been waiting for this moment, for someone who understood what her mother had done, what Emma had been carrying alone for 3 years. She held up her latest drawing. It showed a woman's face, not Harper, not Sarah, but someone else, someone older with kind eyes and graying hair. Beneath the portrait, Emma had written a single word in careful letters, Grandma. Patricia's breath caught. Oh my God, Sarah's mother. Does she know? Know what? Grayson demanded. Sarah's mother died years ago, before I even met Sarah. No, Patricia said slowly, studying the drawing with growing horror and excitement. No, Mr. Carter, Sarah's mother didn't die. She disappeared, right after Sarah went to work for Wellington Enterprises. We always wondered if Wellington had silenced her too, but we could never prove. She looked at Emma with new understanding. Your daughter knows where she is. Sarah told her. Emma nodded once, then drew another building. This one Grayson recognized. A long-term care facility about 2 hours upstate. Beneath it, Emma wrote a room number. Button Louise. Sarah's mother has been in a nursing home this whole time? Grayson tried to process this revelation. Why didn't Sarah tell me? Because she was protecting you, Patricia said grimly. The fewer people who knew where Margaret Morrison was hidden, the safer she would be. Sarah must have visited in secret, must have been using her mother as another backup, an adult witness who could corroborate Emma's memories when the time came. The apartment door shuddered under a heavy impact. Someone was trying to break in. Patricia grabbed Emma, who calmly collected her crayons and newest drawing. Grayson's mind went blank with panic, but Patricia moved with practiced efficiency, heading for the fire escape window. This way! My car is in the alley! The door splintered as they climbed through the window. Grayson looked back to see Marcus Fletcher and 2 other men in dark suits forcing their way inside. Marcus's eyes met his across the room, and for just a moment, Grayson saw something unexpected in the security chief's expression. Regret. Then they were running down the fire escape, Emma clutched against Grayson's chest, Patricia leading the way to a nondescript sedan. They piled in, and Patricia floored the accelerator, tires squealing as they shot into morning traffic. Are they following? Grayson gasped, looking back. Not yet. Marcus will report we escaped, but he'll slow down his team's response. Patricia wove through traffic with disturbing skill. I think Marcus Fletcher might be having second thoughts about his employer. Men like him have limits, and threatening a child sometimes reminds them they still have a conscience. Emma was clutching her newest drawing, the one of her grandmother. Grayson stroked her hair, his mind reeling. Where are we going? To the nursing home. We need Margaret Morrison's testimony before Wellington realizes she's alive. Then we go to the FBI with everything. Emma's drawings, Margaret's memories, Sarah's hidden evidence. We're going to burn Wellington Enterprises to the ground, Mr. Carter. But first, we need to reach your daughter's grandmother before Harper Wellington does. In her penthouse, Harper watched the news coverage of the manhunt for Grayson Carter, the dangerous father who'd allegedly threatened her. Her public relations team had done excellent work. By afternoon, social media was split between those who thought Grayson was a con artist and those who thought Harper had overreacted. No one was talking about FDA investigations or suspicious deaths anymore, but Marcus's latest report worried her. The lawyer, Patricia Chen, Sarah Carter's mother, still alive, and Emma's drawings. Marcus had managed to photograph one before they'd escaped, and what Harper saw made her hands shake. The drawing showed Harper herself, standing in her old office, holding a document, a specific document from 3 years ago, the fabricated Meridian trial data. Emma Carter had been there. Somehow, impossibly, that little girl had witnessed Harper's crimes firsthand. Harper pulled up old security footage, searching, until she found it. Sarah Carter's personnel file. Emergency contact, daughter Emma, age 3. Authorization to bring child to workplace during school closures. 3 years ago, there'd been a snowstorm. Schools had closed. Sarah had brought Emma to the office, had set her up with crayons in the break room while Sarah worked late. Harper remembered that day now. She'd had a meeting with her clinical trials team, had signed off on the data falsification in her office, had never noticed the small child who'd wandered past her door, who'd seen everything with those two observant eyes. Sarah had known, had realized Emma had witnessed it. And instead of panicking, that brilliant, dangerous woman had recognized the opportunity and began training her daughter to be the perfect witness. "She played me," Harper whispered to her empty office. "Sarah Carter played me 3 years ago, and I'm only now realizing it." Her phone rang, the head of her legal team. "Harper, we have a problem. Margaret Morrison just gave a statement to FBI. She's claiming you ordered the death of her daughter. She's claiming Sarah Carter showed her evidence of corporate fraud before she died. And she's claiming there's a 6-year-old child who can corroborate everything." Harper closed her eyes, feeling her empire crumbling around her. She'd built it with cunning and ruthlessness, had crushed everyone who stood in her way. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated a mother's love and a dying woman's determination to protect her child while destroying her enemy. "What do we do?" Harper asked, though she already knew the answer. There was only one way forward now. "We fight. We tie this up in court for years. We destroy their credibility. No," Harper interrupted. "No, we end this. Schedule a meeting with Patricia Chen. Tell her I want to talk. No lawyers, no cameras, just her, me, and the truth. Harper, I strongly advise against. I don't pay you to advise me on everything. Set up the meeting. Tonight." Harper hung up before he could protest further. She stood at her window, looking out at the city she'd conquered, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine fear, not of losing her company or her wealth, but of facing the truth about what she'd become, about the woman whose life she'd taken, about the child whose mother she'd stolen. Harper pulled out her phone and looked at the photo Marcus had sent. Emma Carter's drawing of that day 3 years ago. The little girl had captured not just the scene, but something else. In the corner of the drawing, barely visible, Emma had sketched her own small figure, standing in the doorway, watching. And on tiny Emma's face, her mother had taught her to draw one unmistakable expression: horror. A 3-year-old's horror at seeing something terrible, something wrong, something that even a child's innocent eyes recognized as evil. Harper had seen that look before, in her own childhood memories, in her own mother's face when Harper's father had. She pushed the thought away, but it lingered, poisonous and persistent. When had she become the monster she'd once feared? When had she crossed the line from ruthless businesswoman to someone who could order a mother's death, threaten a child, destroy innocent lives without a second thought? The city lights blurred as unexpected tears filled Harper's eyes. And for the first time in a decade, Harper Wellington allowed herself to feel the weight of what she'd done. 2 hours north, Patricia Chen's sedan pulled into the parking lot of Meadowbrook Care Facility just as the sun began setting. Emma had been silent the entire drive, but her small hand gripped Grayson's tightly, and he could feel her trembling. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered. "We're going to meet your grandma just like Mommy wanted." Emma looked up at him, and Grayson saw tears streaming down her face, but she nodded, clutching her drawings against her chest like a shield. Inside, the facility smelled of antiseptic and old flowers. A tired nurse at the desk looked up as they approached. "We're here to see Margaret Morrison, room 247, Patricia said, her lawyer's voice commanding and confident. The nurse's expression shifted, surprise, then wariness. "Mrs. Morrison doesn't usually get visitors. May I ask who?" "I'm her granddaughter's attorney. This is her son-in-law and granddaughter. It's urgent family business." The nurse studied Emma, and something in the child's face must have convinced her. "Room 247 is at the end of the hall, but please don't upset her, she's been through a lot." They walked down a corridor of closed doors and muffled television sounds. Room 247 was at the corner, door slightly ajar. Patricia knocked softly. "Come in," a voice called, trembling but clear, cultured but carrying an edge of long-suppressed grief. They entered to find a woman in her 70s, sitting in a wheelchair by the window, looking out at the darkening sky. She turned, and Grayson saw Sarah's face, older, worn by time and sorrow, but unmistakably his late wife's mother. Margaret Morrison's eyes locked on Emma, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, my God! Oh, my God, you brought her! Sarah said you would. When Emma turned 6, she said you'd figure it out." Emma dropped Grayson's hand and walked slowly to her grandmother, still clutching her drawings. Margaret reached out with shaking hands, and Emma climbed into her lap, as if she'd done it 1,000 times, though Grayson knew this was their first meeting, or at least Emma's first meeting that she'd remember. "My little documentarian," Margaret whispered, stroking Emma's golden curls. "You remember, don't you, everything your mama showed you?" Emma nodded, then spread her drawings on Margaret's lap. The old woman studied them, tears streaming freely now. "She's got it all here. Every piece of evidence Sarah found. Every crime Harper Wellington committed." Margaret looked up at Patricia. "You're the lawyer Sarah mentioned, Chen. She said if anything happened to her, you'd be the one to understand, to care enough to fight." "I'm here to finish what Sarah started," Patricia said quietly. "But I need your testimony. I need you to tell me everything." Margaret nodded slowly. I'll tell you everything. But first, you need to understand how deep this goes. Harper Wellington didn't just kill my daughter. She killed her own sister." The room went utterly silent. "What?" Patricia breathed. Margaret's face was grim. "Harper Wellington was born Harper Morrison. She's my niece, Sarah's cousin. They grew up together, were best friends as children. But when Harper's pharmaceutical company went public and she needed capital, she stole Sarah's research. 5 years of work on cardiac medications. Sarah confronted her, threatened to expose the theft. That's when Harper manufactured the Meridian acquisition, hired Sarah as a senior analyst to keep her close and controlled. And when Sarah found evidence of the data fabrication, when she realized Harper's medication would kill people, Harper killed her own cousin to keep it quiet." Patricia finished, her voice hollow with shock. Grayson felt the room spinning. "Sarah never told me. She never said Harper was family. Because she was protecting you," Margaret said. "Harper doesn't just ruin people who cross her. She destroys them, their families, their lives. Sarah knew that if you understood the connection, you'd be in even more danger. So she kept it secret, built her case, and prepared Emma to be the witness she couldn't be." Emma stirred in her grandmother's lap, then pulled out a new drawing, one Grayson hadn't seen her create. It showed 2 little girls holding hands, smiling. One was clearly a young Sarah. The other had Harper's distinctive features. Beneath it, Emma had written in careful letters, "Family first, then lies." "That was their motto as children," Margaret whispered. "Family first." Harper twisted it into something poisonous. She decided her empire mattered more than family, more than truth, more than human life. Patricia was already on her phone, texting rapidly. "This changes everything. This isn't just corporate fraud. This is premeditated murder of a family member. This is—" She looked up, her face pale. "Harper just requested a meeting with me. Tonight. She wants to talk privately." "It's a trap," Grayson said immediately. "Maybe," Patricia agreed. "Or maybe she knows her world is collapsing and wants to negotiate. Either way, I'm going. But first, we need to secure Margaret's testimony, get Emma's drawings officially documented, and make sure if anything happens to me, this evidence still makes it to the FBI." She pulled out a camera and began photographing everything. Emma's drawings, Margaret's wheelchair-bound form, the room number. Creating a digital trail that couldn't be erased. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to record your statement now. Everything you know about Harper Wellington, about Sarah's investigation, about what happened 3 years ago. This recording will be uploaded to multiple secure locations simultaneously. Even if Wellington's team somehow stops us, the truth will survive." Margaret nodded, squaring her shoulders, and as the camera began recording, she spoke, her voice growing stronger with each revelation, each piece of evidence, each detail of Harper Wellington's decade-long conspiracy. Emma sat quietly in her grandmother's lap throughout it all, occasionally pointing to one of her drawings when Margaret mentioned a specific document or event. The little girl who'd been silent for 6 months had become an active participant in taking down her mother's killer using the only voice she had, her art. Outside the facility, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Marcus Fletcher sat behind the wheel, watching the lit window of room 247. He'd been ordered to prevent anyone from leaving, to do whatever necessary to stop Margaret Morrison's testimony. But as he sat there, engine idling, hand on his weapon, Marcus found himself unable to move. He'd done terrible things for Harper Wellington. He'd intimidated witnesses, destroyed evidence, orchestrated Sarah Carter's accident 3 years ago. He told himself it was just business, just protecting corporate interests, just following orders. But orders to silence a 6-year-old child, to shoot a grandmother in a wheelchair, to murder a father trying to protect his daughter. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized years ago, but never called. Detective Rachel Morrison answered on the first ring. "Detective Morrison, my name is Marcus Fletcher. I'm Harper Wellington's head of security, and I'm ready to turn state's evidence." Inside the facility, Patricia finished recording Margaret's testimony and uploaded it to 5 different secure servers. She turned to Grayson with grim determination. "Stay here with Emma and Margaret. Keep the door locked. I'm going to meet Harper Wellington and end this tonight. Patricia, you can't go alone. I have to. If she's willing to confess, to negotiate, we might be able to get justice for Sarah without putting Emma through a trial. But if it's a trap..." She pulled out her phone, showing a screen full of automated emails ready to send. "One touch of this button sends everything we have to the FBI, the SEC, every major news outlet, and a dozen backup locations. Harper Wellington knows this. She knows if anything happens to me, her empire burns within the hour." Patricia looked at Emma, who was now drawing again, this time sketching a woman standing at a crossroads, with arrows pointing in different directions. "Your daughter is asking what Harper will choose, freedom and honesty, or pride and destruction." Emma added one more detail to the drawing, a small heart, colored red, placed in the center of Harper's chest. "She's saying Harper still has a heart," Margaret interpreted softly. "Even monsters can choose redemption if they're brave enough to face what they've become." Patricia nodded slowly. "Then let's see if Harper Wellington has that courage." She left, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Grayson locked the door behind her and gathered Emma into his arms, holding his daughter tight as they waited to see if the monster who'd killed Sarah would choose justice or destruction. And in her penthouse across the city, Harper Wellington stood before her mirror, seeing not the powerful CEO she'd spent a decade building, but the frightened little girl she'd once been, the girl who'd watched her father destroy her mother with cruelty and power, who'd sworn never to be a victim again. She'd become what she'd feared. And now, facing Emma Carter's innocent drawings, Margaret Morrison's testimony, and the ghost of her cousin Sarah's betrayed love, Harper had to decide who she truly wanted to be. The choice was simple. The execution would cost her everything. But for the first time in 10 years, Harper Wellington thought that perhaps losing everything she'd gained through evil might be worth finding the person she'd lost along the way. The restaurant where Patricia agreed to meet Harper was neutral ground, a small cafe in Queens, far from Manhattan's elite circles. Harper arrived first, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back without makeup. She looked younger, vulnerable, almost human. Patricia entered precisely on time, her briefcase handcuffed to her wrist. She sat across from Harper without greeting, her expression cold and professional. "You have 30 minutes, Patricia said. "Then I'm walking out and filing federal charges." Harper's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "I want to confess everything, on the record, in exchange for witness protection for Emma Carter and immunity for Grayson." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "You're offering to incriminate yourself?" "I'm offering to destroy my entire company, if it means that little girl doesn't have to testify, if it means she can have a childhood instead of being dragged through years of trials." Harper's voice cracked. "Sarah was my cousin, my best friend. We made promises as children. Family first, always. I broke every promise. I killed her because I was too proud, too greedy, too afraid of losing what I'd built. She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. Every password to every account, every hidden file, every piece of evidence you need to prosecute not just me, but my entire board, my security team, everyone involved. I'll plead guilty to everything: fraud, manslaughter, conspiracy. I'll make sure Emma never has to face me in court. Patricia stared at the phone, then at Harper. Why? Why now? Because I saw Emma's drawing, the one where she sketched me with a heart. Harper's tears fell freely now. A 6-year-old child who I threatened, whose mother I killed, whose life I destroyed. She still thinks I have a heart. She thinks I can choose differently. How can I look at that innocence, that faith in humanity, and choose to be a monster again? Patricia carefully took the phone, verifying the information. Her expression shifted from skepticism to shock as she scrolled through folder after folder of incriminating evidence. "This will send you to prison for life," Patricia said quietly. "I know, but Emma will be free. Grayson will be safe. And maybe," Harper's voice dropped to a whisper, "maybe Sarah will forgive me wherever she is. Maybe I can finally sleep without seeing her face, without hearing her last phone call begging me to stop, without remembering that I chose money over family." Patricia made a decision. She pulled out her own phone and called Detective Morrison. "Rachel, I need FBI here now. Harper Wellington is ready to give a full confession. Yes, everything. Bring immunity papers for Grayson Carter and witness protection documents for Emma Carter." Harper closed her eyes, relief and terror washing over her in equal measure. "Thank you. Tell Emma. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her that her mommy was right about me being bad, but maybe not too bad to change." Across the cafe, a man in a baseball cap lowered his newspaper. Marcus Fletcher had been watching the entire meeting, ready to intervene if Harper had tried anything dangerous. But seeing his former boss break down, seeing her choose justice over freedom, something shifted in him too. He pulled out his own phone and texted Detective Morrison, "Additional evidence incoming. I'm ready to testify against the entire security team. It's time to clean house." The dominoes were falling, and for the first time in 3 years, the ghost of Sarah Carter could rest, knowing her daughter would grow up safe, knowing her sacrifice hadn't been in vain, knowing that even the hardest heart could crack open when faced with a child's simple faith in redemption. 2 hours later, FBI agents surrounded Wellington Enterprises headquarters. Harper Wellington was led out in handcuffs, but her face held something that hadn't been there in years: peace. At the nursing home, Grayson's phone buzzed with the news. He looked down at Emma, who was drawing one final picture. It showed 2 little girls holding hands again, Sarah and Harper as children. But this time, Harper's figure was surrounded by bars, and Sarah's figure had wings. Beneath it, Emma had written, "Mommy flies now, bad lady learns now. Justice and mercy," Margaret whispered, reading over her granddaughter's shoulder. "Sarah taught her both. That's the real legacy, not revenge, but the hope that even the worst of us can choose to be better." Emma finally spoke again, her voice small but clear. "Daddy, can we go home now?" Grayson pulled his daughter close, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, baby, we can go home. We're safe now. We're finally safe." 3 months later, Grayson stood outside Emma's new school, a private academy paid for by the restitution fund established from Wellington Enterprises' seized assets. Emma wore a bright blue dress and carried a backpack full of art supplies. She'd been speaking more each day, slowly emerging from the silence that had protected her for so long. "You ready, sweetheart?" Grayson asked, kneeling to her level. Emma nodded, but her hand tightened on his. "Will the kids like me? They're going to love you. You're brave, smart, and kind, just like your mommy." Emma smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Mommy would be proud, right?" "So proud, baby. So incredibly proud." As Emma walked into the school, Grayson felt a hand on his shoulder. Patricia Chen stood beside him, carrying her ever-present briefcase. "The trial starts next week," she said. "Harper's pleading guilty to all charges. No trial for Emma, no testimony needed. The judge is allowing Emma's drawings as evidence, along with Margaret's testimony and Marcus Fletcher's insider information. It's over, Grayson. You won." But Grayson didn't feel like a winner. He felt exhausted, relieved, and somehow empty. "Did we win, or did we just survive?" "Both," Patricia said honestly. "Survival is its own victory. And Emma, she's going to thrive now." Harper made sure of that. "The restitution includes a trust fund for Emma's education, therapy, everything she needs. Harper's trying to make amends the only way she can." "Does evil really deserve redemption?" Grayson asked, voicing the question that had haunted him for months. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, but I know that Sarah believed in second chances. She told me once, right before she died, that everyone has light and darkness inside them. The question isn't whether darkness exists. It's whether we choose to feed it or starve it. Harper starved her darkness too late to save Sarah, but maybe not too late to save her own soul." Inside the school, Emma sat in her new classroom, surrounded by curious children. The teacher asked everyone to introduce themselves and share something special. When Emma's turn came, she stood and held up a drawing, not of Harper or Sarah or the darkness of the past 3 years, but of a sunrise over a city skyline. "My name is Emma Carter," she said clearly, her voice stronger than Grayson had heard in years. "My mommy was a hero. She taught me that truth is more important than fear, that love is stronger than hate, and that even when bad things happen, morning always comes. This is a new morning." The classroom erupted in applause, and outside, Grayson felt the first real peace he'd known since Sarah's death. His daughter was going to be okay. They were both going to be okay. At the Federal Detention Center, Harper Wellington sat in her cell, reading letters. One from Margaret Morrison, offering forgiveness Harper didn't feel she deserved. One from Patricia Chen, acknowledging her cooperation. And one small envelope with a child's careful handwriting on the outside. Harper opened Emma's letter with shaking hands. Inside was a drawing, Harper standing in darkness, but with a small light glowing in her hands. Beneath it, Emma had written, "Mommy said everyone gets to choose their light. You chose. Thank you for letting me be a kid." Harper pressed the drawing to her chest and wept, for Sarah, for Emma, for the woman she'd been, and the person she might still become. 20 years in prison stretched ahead of her. 20 years to face what she'd done, to rebuild something resembling a soul, to prove that Emma's faith in her heart hadn't been misplaced. It wouldn't be redemption. That would take a lifetime, but it was a start. And sometimes, Harper thought, clutching that drawing like a lifeline, a start is all a monster needs to begin the long journey back to being human. 5 years later, Grayson Carter stood in the audience of Lincoln Center, watching his 11-year-old daughter receive the National Youth Art Achievement Award. Emma had grown into a confident, articulate young girl whose artwork had been featured in galleries across New York. Her signature style, photorealistic portraits combined with symbolic elements, had caught the attention of critics and collectors alike. But more importantly, Emma had found her voice. She spoke at schools about childhood trauma and healing. She used her art to help other children process grief. She'd transformed her extraordinary memory from a burden into a gift, honoring her mother's legacy while building her own future. And now, the presenter announced, Emma will unveil her latest piece, created specifically for tonight's ceremony. The curtain pulled back to reveal a massive canvas, 6 feet tall, breathtaking in its detail and emotion. It showed a woman's face split down the middle. One side was Harper Wellington, as Emma remembered her from that night at Chateau Bleu, cold, cruel, imperious. The other side was Harper, as Emma imagined her now, softer, thoughtful, bearing the weight of her choices with quiet dignity. Between the two faces, Emma had painted a bridge made of light, and crossing that bridge was a small figure, a girl with golden curls, walking from darkness into dawn. The title, displayed on a placard beneath, "The Long Road Home," portrait of choices and consequences. The audience erupted in applause. Grayson felt tears streaming down his face as Emma took the stage, poised and graceful in a way that reminded him achingly of Sarah. "This piece is about my mother's killer," Emma said into the microphone, her voice clear and steady. "5 years ago, Harper Wellington took my mother from me. She destroyed my family. She represents the worst of what humans can become when we choose power over love, money over morality, pride over people." The audience grew quiet, uncomfortable with the raw honesty. "But this piece is also about transformation," Emma continued, "because Harper Wellington made a choice that night 5 years ago. When she could have destroyed us completely, she chose confession over freedom. She chose to protect me instead of protecting herself. She chose to become something better than what she was." Emma looked directly at a camera she knew was streaming to the detention center. "Ms. Wellington, if you're watching, I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay. It will never be okay. But because my mother taught me that holding on to hate only hurts the person carrying it. You gave me my childhood back. You let me heal. And that gift, coming from someone who took so much, means everything." In her cell, Harper Wellington watched the ceremony on a small television, tears streaming down her face. 15 more years of her sentence remained. 15 more years to prove Emma's faith in her hadn't been misplaced. She picked up her own art supplies. Drawing and painting had become her therapy, her meditation, her way of processing the magnitude of what she'd destroyed and what she was slowly, painfully rebuilding. She began sketching a response to Emma's portrait. In Harper's version, the bridge of light was longer, harder to cross. But she was on it, taking one difficult step at a time towards something resembling redemption. Back at Lincoln Center, Grayson hugged his daughter as photographers captured the moment. Margaret Morrison, now 82 and using a walker but still sharp as ever, joined them on stage. "Your mother would be so proud," Margaret whispered to Emma, kissing her granddaughter's forehead. "You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something beautiful. That's not just survival, sweetheart. That's transcendence." Patricia Chen approached with a man Grayson didn't recognize, Marcus Fletcher, now working as a private investigator specializing in corporate fraud cases. He'd served 2 years for his role in Sarah's death and had spent every day since trying to make amends through his work. "Emma," Marcus said quietly, his voice heavy with emotion he'd learned to feel again. "Your artwork, it's incredible. Thank you for including redemption in your story. Some of us need to believe we can be more than the worst things we've done." Emma studied him for a long moment, this man who'd helped orchestrate her mother's death, who'd threatened her family, who'd been part of the machine that nearly destroyed them all. Then she extended her small hand. "My mom used to say that people aren't their mistakes. They're what they do after the mistakes. You're doing better, Mr. Fletcher. Keep going." The simple grace of her words broke something in Marcus. He shook her hand, nodded once, and walked away before his emotions overwhelmed him. But Grayson saw the man's shoulders straighten slightly, saw the burden he carried become just a little lighter. That night, after the celebration ended and the awards were packed away, Grayson and Emma sat on their apartment balcony, a much nicer apartment now, in a safer neighborhood with heating that worked and windows that locked. The restitution fund had given them stability, but it was Grayson's new job as a victims' rights advocate and Emma's art sales that had given them true security. "Daddy?" Emma asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Do you think Mommy can see us? Does she know we're okay?" Grayson looked up at the stars scattered across the New York sky, thinking of Sarah, brilliant, brave Sarah who'd sacrificed everything to protect their daughter and expose the truth. "I think she knows, baby. I think she's been watching over us this whole time, making sure we found our way through the darkness. And I think tonight, wherever she is, she's smiling." Emma was quiet for a moment, then, "I still miss her. Every single day." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too. But you know what? Missing her means she mattered. It means the love was real. And that love, that's what got us through." That's what Harper Wellington couldn't destroy, no matter how hard she tried. Emma pulled out her sketchbook and began drawing by the light of the city. Grayson watched as a familiar scene took shape. Two figures on a balcony, a father and daughter surrounded by stars. But this time Emma added something new. A third figure made of light, standing behind them with hands on their shoulders. Sarah Carter, watching over her family, protecting them still, loving them always. "We made it, Mommy," Emma whispered to the drawing. "We survived, we forgave. We're living the life you wanted for us. Thank you for being brave enough to fight. Thank you for teaching me to be brave too." Grayson pulled his daughter close, and they sat together in the peaceful darkness. Two survivors who'd faced down a monster and emerged not just intact, but transformed, stronger, wiser, more compassionate for their suffering. Harper Wellington had tried to destroy them. Instead, she'd inadvertently given them the greatest gift, proof that love and truth and courage will always eventually triumph over greed and fear and hate. The long road home had been painful, but they'd walked it together, and on the other side they'd found not just justice, but healing. Not just survival, but hope. Not just an ending, but a new beginning. As the city lights twinkled below and the stars shone above, Emma Carter, artist, survivor, advocate, and living testament to her mother's unbreakable love, smiled at the future and knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage Sarah had given her. The little girl who'd been silenced by trauma had found her voice, and she would use it to help others find theirs too. That was Sarah Carter's true legacy. Not the takedown of a corrupt empire, not the exposure of corporate fraud, but the raising of a daughter so full of grace and strength and forgiveness that even her mother's killer could look at her and see hope for redemption. And in that hope, in that impossible grace, Emma Carter proved that the greatest power in the world isn't wealth or status or control, it's love. It always has been, it always will be.